Hello, and welcome to my channel. I'm going to start my channel off by doing a video based on what I would like to call guiltless pleasures, because too many people have this tendency to be caught up in guilty pleasures, that it's something to be ashamed of, and it shouldn't necessarily be shameful. That's not to say that I don't have my guilty pleasures, but they're on my Kindle, so they're in a place where nobody's going to get to them, which is perfectly fine by me. So let's get started with our first series. So my first guiltless pleasure is going to be the A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas. For those who don't know, it is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Although that's really only the first book, A Court of Thorns and Roses, the rest of the series kind of follows a different path, especially when it gets to A Court of Mist and Fury, which is the second book in the series. Beauty and the Beast is not a fairy tale I'm particularly fond of. That doesn't mean it's bad, I've just never had a particular affinity for it. That being said, there are a lot of people who give other people a lot of crap for liking the series because, one, there is some smut in it. Like, it starts in the first book, but it really gets smutty in the second book, which is fine if it weren't marketed as young adult. It's definitely more of an adult series. If once you start getting smutty, young adult is generally marketed towards teens or, late teens, early 20 somethings, but there are a lot of kids who read this much younger. I would not recommend this for anyone under the age of 15 or 16. One of the reasons I like this book series is I like smut. I'm not gonna lie, I do like smut. And so that second book, A Court of Mist and Fury, is definitely right up my alley. And a lot of people really like that book because, there's some sexy times in it, but not a hit or miss. The real thing that people have a problem with this series about is they say it's problematic because Rysand, who is kind of our antagonist in the first book, not straight up villain. He's our antagonist in the first book and takes on a much bigger role. And the rest of the series is considered very possessive, very alpha in nature. And while I can see that, I can guarantee you that I have read adult romance books. I mean, they're trashy, that's why they're my guilty pleasures, but I have read adult romance books that make Rysand look like a progressive feminist with how, quote unquote, alpha they are. It's rather disgusting, but I'm able to look past it for other reasons. But yeah, it's not a bad series per se, and it does have problematic elements. I will acknowledge that. Having read other romance books that are way worse, this is not as bad as people make it up to seem. My second guiltless pleasure would be The Kiss by Eldeminger. It's not a well-known book. I believe, if I remember correctly, I picked this up when I was working at a grocery store, 15 years ago. And I was getting my first paychecks, and I was basically picking up anything and everything, especially on my breaks. Like, I'd go and buy a book. Like, these are cheesy romance. They're not as bad. They're almost on par with Harlequin romances. This story is about a young woman named Tess who, the night before her wedding, finds her fiance with his lover in the church. Scandalous, I know. And they're having sex, and it wakes her up to just how unhappy she is. So she meets up with an old friend of hers / her brother's, I think. It's been a while since I've read this. This gentleman, Will, who is described in the book as looking like Orlando Bloom or Johnny Depp. As time has gone on, I've liked to put Tom Hiddleston in his place, has come over from England, and he's attracted to Tess. And he gives her this opening. Should anything happen, he would happily take her on this kind of road trip he's taking across the U.S. to take a van back to a friend of his on the West Coast, because they start on the East Coast. So Tess, having seen what has transpired in the church, decides to take him up on his offer, and so they set out across the U.S. together. What I like about this book is that Tess kind of goes through the grieving process. Like, early on in the book, she talks about throwing up in the hotel room, like being in a miserable state. But as time passes, she kind of begins to understand what was wrong with her relationship and what was wrong with her fiance and what was wrong with her life, because she was working as a dental assistant and she wasn't terribly happy with that job, and she kind of finds herself on this journey, and she decides she's going to do different things differently when she gets to the West Coast, and it takes time for her to reach these decisions. She doesn't just suddenly come to it overnight. Like, she's bargaining with herself, which is one of the stages of grief as she's on this journey. I remember at one point she talked about when she got to the West Coast, she'd take a flight back home to the East Coast to deal with the repercussions. She wasn't going to stay there, and eventually that kind of went by the wayside. Like, it's a, I don't want to say simple. Simple sounds so insulting to a book, and it's not. But it isn't a groundbreaking book by any stretch of the imagination. One of the other things I love about this is that Will never coerces her to do anything. He's just there, even though he's very obviously attracted to her, which is nice. But he never pushes her to do anything. Like, he tries to help her heal, but he never, all he's doing is buying her food, giving her a chance to talk things out. They really grow together over this journey. There is no smut, which for those of you who like a smutless story, this is right up your alley. I don't know if you can even find this really anymore. God, I've had this since 2004. And also towards the end, there's a fake wedding, and it's great. And it's a really cute little book, and I've kept it because it doesn't offend, and it's very sweet, and the characters are never got on my nerves. Tess never, she whined a little bit at the beginning because she was allowed to, but once she realized how shitty her fiance had been, she gets over that, and she starts getting more into trying to help herself and help herself grow, and Will's there to help her, and there's attraction, and it all ends up well because, it's a romance. So my next guiltless pleasure is The Blacksmiths Bride by Elizabeth Hobbs. Fun thing about this particular book is that I found it first on fictionpress.net, and that was years ago, and I remember reading it. I don't know if it had all come out at the time or if she was still writing it, but I remember reading it while she still had it up on fictionpress.net, and then I remember her taking it down in the announcement that she was getting it printed. I ended up getting it for Christmas, I think, that year. This story is about Joanna, and she dreams of marrying this knight, but he ends up rejecting her, and she's become something of a burden to her uncle, who ends up marrying her off to the knight's half-brother, who is a blacksmith, Hal. He does this under the understanding that Hal has a better chance of joining the Blacksmiths Guild, which Joanna's uncle is the leader of, I believe, or he's at least on the board, so he could have sway. So they end up getting married. It is, I don't want to say hate to love, even though that would be the easiest way to describe it. I would say it's dislike to love, because it takes them, she never really hates him. She's annoyed by him, and he keeps calling her on her shit and his brother on his shit, and but neither of them are truly faultless. Hal's got his own bullshit to deal with. They move away to Hal's village, and over time begin to come around, of course, because again, it's a dislike to love. And one of the things I like is that Hal has a respectable profession, and he takes pride in it. He wants to get better at it. He wants to join the guild. He wants to be a respected member of society. He could have, even in the book, he could have at one time become a knight, but it was never a calling for him. He is a bastard son, but he never wanted to be a knight. That's nice to see for a change, because he could have, she could have gone down the road of he was a knight, and the lady fell in love with a knight, and this, that, and the other. It's no, it's nice to see a profession, a working class profession in a book for a change. People don't look down on it. It's a very respected profession, and Hal's good at it. He makes a comfortable living, and Joanna kind of blossoms under it. She was kind of a whiny little shit at the beginning of the story, but as she becomes the lady of the house and kind of a lady in the village, because again, this blacksmith is a respected profession, and he's kind of the top of the food chain, or at least close to the top of the food chain in the village. People come to respect her, and she starts shining under this and starts really becoming her own person, and so that draws them closer together. There is one small smut scene, but it's no worse than in any other Harlequin / cheesy romance book. So it's nothing to offend the senses. It's about middle of the book, and that's about it. I mean, it's still there, but again, it's no worse than any other romance book. But yeah, I like this I like this story. So my last guiltless pleasure, and this is a really questionable choice on my part. The manga High School of the Dead was written by Daisuke Sato and illustrated by Shoji Sato. They have no relation. The premise of the story is your typical zombie outbreak, just that it follows a band of high schoolers and their school nurse as they try to find their families in Japan, somewhere in Japan. It stopped after 7 volumes due to the death of Daisuke. He got sick, and Shoji started another series called Triage X, which I have not checked out. I have maybe looked at the first volume, but I haven't gone past that because manga has more or less fallen in and out of my life, more or less fallen out of my life at this point, unless something really grabs my attention. I might try to pick it up, but I just don't know if it's ever going to be on my radar. A lot of reasons why I consider this a guiltless pleasure is because if you can't tell by the cover of the volume, these are ridiculously sexualized illustrations within this manga of high school teenage girls and their nurse. Like, they are just popping out of tops and skirts, and things are getting ripped and torn, and it's ridiculous. Like, it's over the top, and they're high schoolers. They're all 15, 16, 17. But that doesn't bother me. That's what makes this a guiltless pleasure, is because it's like, yeah, it's stupid. It's overly sexualized. But whatever. A lot for me, what draws me to it is the fact that it's about a zombie outbreak. And I, for whatever reason, have an affinity for zombies. I've watched The Walking Dead. I've watched Train to Busan. Like, I kind of watch maybe not every, but the majority of my movie monster or horror movie with some kind of, I guess movie monster would be a zombie. I'm not drawn to werewolves. I'm sure as shit not drawn to vampires. Ghosts are a hit and miss, depending on jump scares and whether or not they're too prevalent. I don't know. Well, I can get into that later. But generally, I'm drawn to zombies, and I was drawn to this because the students actually make an effort to try to survive. And they do things that do make sense, and they make decisions that are bad, but they're teenagers, and I'm willing to forgive them for the fact that they're teenagers and they make bad decisions. Stupidly overly sexualized. Like, this series is the one where the anime had a bullet passing through moving breasts, and it became a thing online. Like, people were doing the math to try to figure out how fast this girl's breasts were moving. And this particular character doesn't even have the biggest breasts in the series, so it's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But it's still one of my guiltless pleasures. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the end of my first video. Again, all guiltless pleasures. I happily display these on my bookshelves. And if people ask about them, I will tell them. I'm hoping in the future to upload maybe twice a week, simply because the job I have requires me to work about 10 to 12 hours a day, and that's not including travel time. I'm hoping to get this up in January, but my computer's in the shop right now. I'm recording this on my phone. I'm hoping to get this and about 2 more videos up before the end of January, but we'll have to wait and see. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you get something out of this, and let me know in the comments below your thoughts, your feelings, what your guiltless pleasures are. Try not to feel so bad about enjoying a book other people deem problematic. As long as you know that those problematic elements exist and acknowledge that, enjoy what you enjoy. Just don't be a dick about it. All right. Thanks again. Bye.